History is more than dates and facts. It's a living tapestry of human experiences. Join me tonight as we unravel its threads and escape into a world long gone. You awaken with the soft hiss of wind tugging at your felt-covered yurt. It's early, not even dawn, and yet the world around you is already stirring horses, snorting hooves, tapping on dry grass, the low murmur of men, readying themselves for movement. You're a Mongol soldier, part of an enormous living organism that stretches across the steppe like a breathing, galloping beast. Outside, the cold stings your nose, but your calloused hands move without hesitation. You step into your boots, then into the leather stirrups, left foot first, always swinging effortlessly onto your horse's back. One of five, by the way. You don't ride the same one all day. That would be ridiculous. You'll switch mounts mid-ride like changing shoes during a marathon. Only the shoes are living, galloping creatures trained to respond to subtle pressure from your knees. The air smells like boiled mutton, stale sweat horse dung, and victory. Maybe also fermented mare's milk, which you'll definitely be sipping from a goatskin pouch before breakfast. Around you, thousands of yurts collapse with practiced ease. There's no shouting. Each family, each unit knows its role. There's no wasted movement. These are people born for motion. You're not packing up a home, you're folding your existence into something portable. A felt-wrapped life you can carry wherever conquest leads. Your saddle isn't soft. It's built for endurance, not comfort. There's a reason Mongol riders were said to sleep on horseback. You lean forward and adjust the bow hanging from your shoulder, laminated layers of wood, horn, and sinew, shaped in a graceful curve that stores absurd amounts of kinetic energy. It hums softly when you test the string, and you do. Because it's your best friend. Arrows. You carry dozens, some armor-piercing, some barbed, others fire-tipped for particularly persuasive arguments. And speaking of friends, here's a quirky tidbit: you carry dried curds in a pouch, so sour they could strip paint. And when water is scarce, a quick nick of your horse's vein and a drink of blood keeps you marching. Hydration step style. There's no front line out here, no fancy tents with gold trim. The Khan doesn't sit in a cushioned chair barking orders. He's probably already mounted, blending in among the officers, the guards, and the scouts, disappearing over the ridgeline. You fall into formation, which is more of a suggestion than a rigid structure. Everyone knows the patterns. The decimal system keeps it organized: 10-man squads, 100-man companies, 1,000-man battalions. You all know where to ride. You all know how to vanish and reappear like mist on a battlefield. Now here comes the cheeky reality check: you probably won't survive this campaign. But neither will anyone who stands in your way. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time. I'm always curious where these midnight marches are happening. Wherever you are, I hope tonight brings you rest, comfort, and maybe a curious dream or two. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your mount trots forward, joining the growing tide of riders moving across the plain like dark water. There's a rhythm to it, all the clatter of hooves, the creak of saddles, the flap of fur-lined coats. You ride in silence, but it's not empty. It's focused. You're a piece of something ancient, swift, and devastating. Historians still argue whether Mongol supremacy was due to individual brilliance or sheer collective discipline. But as the sun climbs, spilling gold across the horizon, you know one thing for certain: this army is unlike anything the world has ever seen. And so you move toward a target not yet named through terrain, not yet scouted under skies that change faster than the winds of fortune. But wherever you're headed, someone is going to learn what happens when stirrup, steel, and step converge. You ride with 5 horses, but you only sit on one at a time. The others trail alongside or gallop ahead, each trained to respond to your whistle, your shout, or even the subtle flick of a rein. It's not just luxury, it's survival. In the Mongol army, cavalry is everything and you are its living engine. Your herd is your lifeline. When one horse tires, you leap to another mid-ride without slowing. Try that on a modern freeway, and you'll end up on YouTube with a million views and a broken spine. But out here on the open steppe, it's the difference between a clean escape and a dying wheeze in the dust. Each mount has a job. One is fast and light, good for pursuit. One is strong and steady, perfect for hauling gear. Another is trained for battle, comfortable with chaos and sudden screams. The smallest, that one's for crossing rivers. Yes, it swims better than you do. You carry everything with you. Extra arrows dried. Meat padded armor, a flint for fire, even spare bowstrings in waxed pouches. Your horse carries the rest a water skin. Your tent spare boots, a bone comb, and something sacred from home. Maybe your grandmother's silver ring or a charm tied with eagle feathers. You're mobile, but you're not rootless. Every rider carries a homeland under his saddle. You might notice something odd about these horses. They're not tall or elegant like Arabian steeds. They're squat, muscular, and a bit shaggy, basically. Furry motorcycles that run on grass and don't break in the cold. And cold it is. Mongol horses can dig through snow to find frozen grass. They're hardy, patient, and stubborn as history itself. Here's a tidbit for you. Mongol riders would sometimes cut a vein in their horse's neck and drink warm blood mid-campaign. Not out of cruelty, but necessity. It was protein, iron, and hydration in a place where streams vanish and wells freeze. The horses, they just kept going like living canteens with hooves. When a scout returns with news, perhaps a caravan spotted in the distance, or a city's gates closed tight, the information flows fast. There's no sitting around for a war council. The command structure is sleek, direct, and terrifyingly efficient. You ride, you fight, you win. Then you ride again. And when you ride, you don't go alone. Each Mongol unit functions like a family, even if most of them are technically cousins, brothers, or in-laws twice removed. You eat together, sleep side by side, share gossip, and argue over who gets first pick from the next raid. Every 10-man squad is a mini ecosystem tight-knit and balanced with roles understood through years of training repetition and the occasional fistfight. Historians still argue whether the Mongol cavalry's strength lay in their sheer numbers or their adaptability. But out here, riding across a landscape that seems endless, you understand the truth. It's not about size, it's about rhythm. About understanding your mount's breath better than your own. About moving together thousands of riders forming a single fluid force. Occasionally your horse stumbles on a prairie dog hole, but it recovers fast. You pat its neck, mumbling something you once heard an old shaman say, a mix of thank you and sorry. You don't waste words out here. You save them for battle cries. You pass herds of sheep, goats, and even the occasional yak, all tended by families who will pack up and move by sundown. The army brings its ecosystem with it. No supply wagons needed. You graze as you go. If a village has grain, good. If not, you ride past or take what you need. The grass is always greener somewhere, especially when you're bringing 10,000 hooves with you. Here's a fringe tidbit some Mongol horsemen taught their mounts to respond to subtle vocal commands turned trot, even hide. It wasn't magic, just years of training. And when you're sneaking up on an enemy camp at night, a quiet horse is better than any sword. As midday burns higher, the column of riders begins to fan out, each unit maneuvering in a wide arc. You spot a dust cloud ahead, maybe a merchant caravan, maybe scouts from an enemy city. No one panics. You adjust your pace. Every horse shifts with you. A smooth, synchronized flex of muscle and strategy. You don't charge blindly. Mongol cavalry rarely charges unless it's already won. First they encircle, then they confuse, then they strike. A dance of arrows and flanking wheels. Your fingers twitch toward your bow just thinking about it. And as the sun drops behind a rolling hill, the whole army slows. It's time to camp. Not because you're tired, though your knees might disagree, but because light is precious. Night riding happens, but only with purpose. You dismount, check your horse's hooves, run a comb through their manes to clear burrs, and whisper thanks to the one who carried you all day. You share a meal dried meat fat, maybe a scoop of fermented curds that taste like regret. You talk, not loudly, mostly in gestures. Laughter comes in low chuckles, not roars. The fire is small, the stars massive. And tomorrow, you'll do it again. Multiply this by 10,000 men, 100,000 horses, and thousands of square miles. That's how you build an empire, not with walls, but with hooves. You don't wait for battle to test your bow. Every chance you get, you're drawing and loosing arrows, adjusting your grip, your stance, your breath. It's second nature now, so natural you sometimes forget how unnatural it is to be able to shoot accurately while galloping at full speed across uneven ground. But this is the Mongol way. You were trained from childhood to hit a squirrel on the run. Human targets, just bigger squirrels with worse luck. The bow you carry is a masterpiece of composite engineering. Wood core horn belly sinew, backing all layered glued with fish bladders and wrapped tight. It takes over a year to make one properly. When unstrung, it curves backward, like it's holding in a secret. When strung, it sings. That hum when you pull it. That's the sound of 1,000 tiny deaths waiting to fly. Your quiver isn't just a pouch, it's a miniature arsenal. You carry different arrows for different occasions. Armor piercers with bodkin points, barbed ones to make removal. Problematic and even fire arrows wrapped with pitch-soaked cloth for those days when you want to add smoke to insult. And yes, Mongols used whistling arrows, specially carved to make a high-pitched shriek in flight. Not to kill, just to terrify. You practice while moving. Standing shots are for statues. You lean sideways in the saddle, twist backward to fire at pursuers, and duck low to hide behind your horse's flank, using it as a mobile shield. It's a full-body dance of balanced breath and brutal intention. Here's a delightful tidbit. Mongol children began bow training before they could ride. Little ones practiced on lizards and birds. By the time they could sit on a sheep without falling off, they were already deadly. Graduation. Successfully hitting a wooden disc flung into the air from horseback. No pressure. You grip your bowstring with a thumb draw using a leather ring to protect the joint. It allows for a cleaner release and you can shoot faster than most European archers could dream. Your arrows don't arc gently, they slam. At short range, they punch through armor like a grudge. And while we're being cheeky, here's a modern comparison. If European knights were walking tanks, you're a flying drone with a quiver of guided missiles. The knight is impressive until you poke holes in him before he ever gets close. Historians still argue whether the Mongol bow's effectiveness was due more to material innovation or relentless training. But from where you're sitting, half turned in your saddle loosing arrows at tree trunks, without breaking pace, it hardly matters. The results are real. You've seen entire enemy ranks hesitate at the sound of your bowstring singing in chorus. On campaign, you don't waste arrows. Every shot counts. But when the time comes when you crest a hill and spot a line of infantry below you, and your comrades don't charge, you circle, you pelt them from afar, you ride off. They break formation to pursue. Then you turn, and that's when they learn that you weren't fleeing, you were hunting. This is the famed Parthian shot on steroids. The Mongols didn't invent it, but they perfected it. You ride away at full speed, twist backward and fire. One shot, two, maybe three straight into the faces of the overconfident. It's not just a trick, it's policy. Your bowstring frays, so you swap it with one stored in a waterproof pouch. Always carry extras. Always. The worst death is dying with a perfect shot unloosed because your gear failed. You tighten it, test the pull, and sigh with satisfaction. Ready again. You've heard stories, whispers in campfire circles about arrows striking so true that they split armor at the seams or passed through two men in a row. Exaggeration, maybe, but when you've seen a line of soldiers break and run before your unit even draws close, you start to believe. Here's another offbeat tidbit. Mongol arrowheads were sometimes inscribed with family or unit symbols. Not for vanity, for bookkeeping. After a battle, you recover your arrows, expensive handmade precious. And if one was used in a particularly bold strike, you might hang it up. A grim trophy. Occasionally, your unit holds shooting contests after setting up camp. Targets might be logs, pumpkins, or even floating gourds in a stream. It's part sport, part training, part bragging rights. You hit 2 gourds at once last week. No one's forgotten, not even the gourds. As evening falls, you oil your bow, carefully wrapping it in felt to protect it from damp. The glue binding it can soften if wet. That's a weakness, one of the few. If it rains, you cover it with your own cloak. Yes, even before your own head. You think back to your first bow, a tiny thing handed down from your older brother. The string bit your fingers, the arrows wobbled mid-flight, and you missed more than you hit. But you kept going. Now your bow is an extension of your will. And when you draw it, the world quiets. You don't think. You don't aim. You know, sleep comes slowly under the stars. You can hear the quiet twang of someone nearby, practicing in the dark just for the rhythm of it. A gentle whisper of string and wind, the sound of an empire taking shape. The first time you see the Mongol army change direction, it feels like watching a school of fish. No shouted orders, no frantic riders flailing their arms, just a ripple through the ranks, a sudden swerve of bodies and hooves that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. It's all about signals. Up ahead you spot a small cluster of men on a low ridge. One raises a black flag, holds it steady for a heartbeat, then waves it in a slow circle. Without hesitation, your unit veers east, not a single voice raised. No confusion, just obedience. This is how battles begin, not with a charge but with coordination. Mongols don't rely on luck or shouting. They use flags for daylight commands, horns for long-distance alerts, and fire or smoke for signaling across mountain ranges. A puff of smoke might mean attack now. A red flag might call for archers to move forward. And when dusk falls, torches flicker atop hills relaying coded patterns like fireflies in formation. Each unit has its own signaler, usually a seasoned warrior with eagle eyes and nerves of leather. He's not there to fight. He's the brainstem of the operation, keeping everything in sync. Lose your signaler, and you risk chaos. Here's a strange but true detail. Some horn blasts mimic animal calls. A wolf's howl, a crane's cry, each has meaning. Part intimidation, part code. One enemy commander is said to have panicked when he heard the eerie scream of what he swore was a dying demon. It was just a trumpet carved from yak horn. Effective, though. You've trained for months, maybe years, to recognize each flag and sound instinctively. There's no time to pause and think during battle. Your horse reacts faster than you do veering at the first flutter of fabric. That's how deep the training runs. Sometimes you wonder how your enemies perceive this. Most armies fight in straight lines row after row, clanking and stomping forward like wind-up toys. Not you. Your army flows, expands, contracts, encircles, vanishes, returns. It's not a line, it's weather. And when silence falls, that's the worst sound of all. Picture it: an enemy force sets up camp on a broad plain. They post guards, light fires, they expect maybe an ambush, maybe a scout attack. But what they don't expect is nothing. Hours pass. Stillness. No riders, no arrows, no dust trails. And then just before dawn, the wind shifts and the first flaming arrow arcs in from a direction no one thought to guard. Historians still argue whether this eerie synchronization was purely tactical genius, or if it came from deep cultural roots in steppe herding and hunting. Moving animals, silently directing them with whistles and sticks, was that the training ground for one of history's most coordinated war machines? You nudge your horse forward, eyes on the horizon. A formation of light cavalry peels off at an angle. Moments later, another group mirrors them. You don't need to ask. The trap is forming. You'll circle behind, feign a retreat, then collapse the jaws. Your part ride fast, react faster. Don't question the signals, just trust them. You remember the drills. 10-man teams racing across open ground, responding to randomly flashed flags. The penalty for delay? A round of fermented mare's milk so sour it might be considered a war crime. You learned fast. Another odd tidbit: during larger campaigns, Mongols sometimes used flaming arrows not just as weapons, but as timers. A volley launched at the right moment could cue a distant unit to attack. When you see the fire in the sky move. Even in peacetime, the signaling continues. During long marches, messages pass from rider to rider, using small bone tubes, hollow cylinders containing tightly rolled slips of script. These tubes are weatherproof, fastened with wax, and tied to the armpit of the rider's coat for warmth and safekeeping. You've delivered a few yourself. It's nerve-wracking. Drop one and you're the next target. As night falls, the camp springs up again, not in chaos, but precision. Tents arranged in sectors. Fires burning low to preserve the darkness. Patrols set by flag order, not argument. And in the middle of it all, the signalers gather near the command yurt, reviewing tomorrow's sequence. They speak in clipped phrases, nodding at sketches made with ash on hide. The conversation is minimal. Everyone knows what to do. Everyone knows the stakes. You stare up at the stars, those ancient lights that once guided nomads across the endless grasslands. The same stars now shine over one of the most terrifyingly well-coordinated armies the world has ever seen. And when the horns call tomorrow, long, low, and rising, you'll know exactly where to ride, exactly when to draw your bow, and exactly how to vanish again into the morning mist. You're galloping away from the battlefield, dust kicking behind you, arrows bouncing in your quiver like the last dice in a loaded game. Behind you, your enemy cheers. They think you're retreating. They think they've won. They think poorly. This is the Mongols' signature move, the feigned retreat. A tactic so effective, so devastating that entire kingdoms have fallen for it. Literally, it starts small. A single unit turns tail. Then 2. Then 5. Dust clouds rise. Hooves thunder. Panic seems to ripple backward through the ranks like spilled water. Your enemy, smelling blood, breaks formation and gives chase. It's exactly what you want. You glance sideways at your fellow riders. They're smirking just slightly. The hard part isn't the retreat. It's pretending to be bad at it. You keep your head low, shoulders hunched, body language panicked. But your eyes are watching the ground, marking where the terrain dips, where the soft sand will slow pursuers, where the rise offers the perfect shooting angle. It's choreography, not chaos. And then, like a switch flipped, you twist in the saddle, draw your bow, and let the first arrow fly backward at full gallop. It strikes a pursuing soldier square in the chest. The others hesitate. Too late. The rest of your unit turns in unison. The hunter becomes the hunted. It's not just you. From both flanks, fresh Mongol units emerge previously hidden behind low ridges or in the tree line. Within moments, your enemy is no longer chasing. They are encircled, confused, and collapsing. Historians still argue whether this tactic originated with the Mongols or earlier steppe tribes like the Scythians or Xiongnu. But there's no doubt the Mongols weaponized it with terrifying precision. They didn't just retreat, they performed the retreat. You once saw an entire army abandon a siege fleeing in disarray, only to return the next day with 10,000 more troops in tow. The besieged celebrated all night. The next morning, their gates were broken, their walls aflame. Here's a quirky tidbit: the feigned retreat worked best against disciplined troops. Why? Because those are the soldiers who think they must pursue. We're trained, they say. We're ready. But they aren't ready for the moment when their formation unravels and Mongol arrows start falling like hail. There's even a phrase whispered among commanders: the Mongols win twice. Once when they flee and again when you follow. And there's risk to the maneuver, of course. A real retreat can turn into one if morale dips or an inexperienced unit misreads the signal. That's why the decimal structure matters. Your 10-man squad answers to a 100-man commander who knows your strengths and weaknesses. If you're not suited to run and bait, you're kept in reserve. The army doesn't gamble, it calculates. The trick is in timing. Turn too soon and your enemy sees the trap. Turn too late and you're a porcupine on horseback. So you train. You drill. You run mock retreats for hours, twisting and retwisting your body to fire behind you without missing stride. It's exhausting, but when it works, there's nothing like it. You've heard stories from the western frontiers where European knights couldn't understand the tactic. They charged into what they thought was a rout only to find themselves surrounded, peppered with arrows, their heavy armor turning from protection into prison. Here's another fringe detail some Mongol units were ordered to drop: gear shields, helmets, even spare bows during the retreat. All to convince the enemy that the panic was real, and it worked. One enemy general reportedly said they fled like cowards. His tombstone says otherwise. Back at camp, the stories get exaggerated. I dropped my stirrup, someone says, and 5 men tripped over it. I faked a cramp in my leg and drew 20 cavalry into the gorge. The jokes are good-natured. Everyone knows the real credit goes to coordination. Sometimes the tactic doesn't even end in a fight. You flee, they follow, and then nothing. You vanish. They return to camp confused and spooked. That night, while they sleep, you cut their supply lines and poison their wells. The battle happens without swords. It's psychological warfare, and it's exhausting. You must act afraid without being afraid. You must run fast, then turn faster. You must trust the warriors to your left and right more than you trust your own instincts. Tonight, as you sit by a small fire rubbing down your horses, you replay the maneuver in your head. Could you have waited one more breath before turning? Did you fire too soon? You'll adjust. You'll refine. You'll do it again. And when the next army gives chase, their commanders will think they've cornered you. They'll smile. They'll shout. They'll urge their men forward with cries of victory. They won't realize they've already lost. You wake up to the sound of grass. Not bird song or the clank of armor, but grass, the soft tearing of thousands of horses, methodically grazing across an open plain. It's the quiet rhythm of an army feeding itself. Welcome to Mongol logistics. Forget long baggage trains and caravans of wagons creaking under the weight of flour and salted pork. Your army carries its pantry under the saddle and grows its dinner while it marches. Every Mongol soldier is part rider, part forager, part quartermaster. No one waits for a delivery. You are the delivery. You start your day with kurut, a pebble-sized chunk of dried curd. It's as hard as stone and sour enough to make your ears sting, but it keeps you moving. A bit of dried meat follows, cut so thin it's translucent. If you're lucky, you've got some Erig fermented mare's milk that fizzes slightly and smells like courage and regret. And if food runs low, you don't starve. You improvise. Every man knows how to trap fish and, if necessary, drink from a vein. One slice with a small blade and your horse gives up a few mouthfuls of blood. It's not cruelty, it's cooperation. You give back in salt and care. That same horse will carry you across the continent. Historians still debate whether the Mongol logistical model was superior because it was mobile or because it was simple. The truth is, it was both. The army was an ecosystem, not a machine. Self-regulating, constantly moving, and shockingly self-sufficient. You think back to your first long ride 3 days without a real stop through steps so dry, your lips cracked like pottery. You lived off jerky boiled water strained through your scarf and dried cheese that made you hallucinate a little. You came out stronger and slightly more afraid of cheese. Here's a quirky detail. Mongols didn't bring much in the way of cooking pots. Too heavy. Instead, they often boiled meat in the stomach of a sheep filled with water and heated with hot stones. Call it steppe sous vide. And they didn't always camp. If the army was in a hurry, you'd eat in the saddle. Reach into your pouch, chew on a strip of mutton jerky, maybe sip some snowmelt collected in a goat bladder, then keep moving. Eating wasn't an event, it was a maintenance task. Supplies came from the land, but also from raids. Every village you passed was a potential storehouse. Grain, livestock, carts, tools, it all became part of the army's ever-growing shadow. You didn't pillage mindlessly, you took what was useful. You left the rest smoldering. Some units had designated noker servants or trusted companions tasked with cooking repairing gear and wrangling spare horses. They weren't your butlers, they were survival multipliers. You respected them, or else. And speaking of gear, you maintained it religiously. You oiled your saddle daily, checked your stirrups hourly, and kept your bow strung only when necessary. Every item you carried had been tested by wind, rain, and battle. Nothing ornamental, nothing wasted. Clothing was part of the logistics, too. Your robe was layered wool, warm and cold, breathable in heat. Your boots were soft-soled for quiet walking and stiff enough to brace a fall. If they wore out, you stitched them yourself using horse sinew and bone needles. Here's another fringe tidbit. Dung wasn't just a nuisance, it was fuel. Dried horse droppings burned slow and hot, perfect for boiling tea or roasting meat, without leaving a smoky trail. You could track a Mongol army by the lack of trees and the suspiciously efficient fires. And when the army did set up a base, maybe for a long siege or winter quarters, it was a marvel. Tents arranged by rank livestock, corralled in specific patterns, latrines dug far from the water source. Even the dung piles were organized. You don't conquer half the world by being messy. You remember the camp around Samarkand, thousands of yurts laid out like a city grid. Cook fires flickering like stars. Blacksmiths hammering. Horses tethered in neat lines. You could walk from one end to the other and never see the same stew twice. Some camps had mobile forges and tanneries, weapons repaired on site, armor patched, arrows fletched by moonlight. If the campaign lasted months, women and children might be brought forward to set up semi-permanent homes. The army didn't stop living, it just kept living elsewhere. And if you ever did run low on supplies, that's when the YAM system kicked in the Mongol postal relay. Along pre-scouted roads, you'd find stations with fresh horses' food and even intelligence reports. Originally built for messengers, these stations became arteries of survival. Need salt ride 2 days west. Need grain. There's a storehouse under the name of an uncle's oath brother. It works. Tonight you settle by your fireless cooking stones, nibbling dried meat soaked in warm water. Around you, a dozen men do the same. The silence is comfortable. You're tired but not weary, hungry but not worried. The army feeds itself, moves itself, heals itself. It doesn't need wagons. It just needs wind hooves and hunger. And tomorrow it will ride again. You don't steal from another Mongol, not even a spoon, not even a half-used strip of jerky. The punishment isn't a slap on the wrist, it's execution, or worse, expulsion from the army. And that out here is basically a slower death. This is the Yasa, the code of law that binds your world. Part military doctrine, part moral compass, part survival manual. It's a system so strict and far-reaching that even the great Khan himself was subject to its weight. You know it like a prayer? Not because someone read it to you from a scroll. Most of it was never written down in your time, but because you've lived it. You've recited it in drills, muttered it before sleep, and watched men die by its hand. Lie execution. Abandon your comrade in battle death. Urinate in water sources death and public humiliation. Disrespect your superior officer. Let's just say it won't end with a talking to. But the Yasa isn't just about punishment, it's about order. It tells you where to camp, who speaks first in a meeting, even how to treat captured enemies. Spoiler, it's not always badly. If they're skilled, they might be cooking for you next week. Historians still argue over the origins of the Yasa. Some say Genghis Khan compiled it in a single decree during a tribal gathering in the early 1200s. Others believe it evolved over time an oral code enforced with the consistency of steel-tipped discipline. Either way, its effects are everywhere. You've seen a man executed for stealing a sheep not from an enemy but from another unit. The sheep was returned. The thief was not. Justice is swift, not cruel, just cold. Like the steppe wind. Here's a quirky detail under the Yasa: hospitality was sacred. If a traveler, even an enemy, came seeking shelter, you were obliged to feed and house them at least for a short time. Turn them away without reason punishable. It's an odd contradiction. Ruthless on the field, gracious at the hearth. And yes, the Yasa forbids the use of women as plunder. That's not to say every soldier follows this, of course. Human frailty is universal, but when violations happen, they're treated seriously. The army doesn't tolerate disorder even if it wears the face of victory. Discipline isn't just legal, it's social. You obey your commander not because he's bigger or louder, but because the decimal system says so. You're in a squad of 10. That squad belongs to a company of 100. That company is part of a battalion of 1,000. Each layer is clear, accountable, and reinforced with generations of step hierarchy. You remember when you first joined. You made the mistake of trying to fix your stirrup during a formation drill without permission. The officer didn't yell. He simply ordered your bow taken for a day. No weapon, no practice. You learned your lesson in silence. There's a saying whispered among the veterans: a Mongol without discipline is just a man on a horse. You repeat it sometimes when your hands are idle. It's not poetry, it's truth. And the Yasa doesn't only govern warriors, it applies to smiths, cooks, herders, even the Khan's inner circle. During a feast, you once saw a noble drop a piece of meat on the floor, then try to hide it rather than offer it to the fire spirits. He was removed from the tent, quietly, respectfully, permanently. Here's another odd tidbit: the Yasa required battlefield equality and loot division. Yes, commanders got larger shares, but even the lowest soldier received a portion. You never fight for nothing. And if your unit performs well, you might get an extra goat or even a captured falcon. Fairness enforced at sword point. It also encourages record keeping, not the paper piled kind, the oral kind. Memory is sacred. A man in your unit can recite the names of every fallen warrior in your battalion for the past 10 years. It's not superstition, it's duty. You've seen the results of the Yasa firsthand. Once during a siege, a subordinate officer disobeyed a timing signal and led his unit into premature combat. The attack failed. The officer survived. Barely. But by nightfall, he had been demoted and reassigned to dung detail cleaning latrines with a carved yak bone spoon for a month. He never disobeyed again. The law doesn't fear the strong, it makes the strong behave. Even the Khan bows to it. He may adjust a clause here, reinterpret a detail there, but the Yasa isn't his puppet. It's his armor. It's what keeps 100 tribes from tearing each other apart every time someone loses a horse or says the wrong ancestor's name. Tonight, as you sit beneath a sky heavy with stars and possibility, you run your fingers over the symbols carved into the haft of your bow, reminders of rules you swore to obey. You think of your comrades silent sleeping, breathing in rhythm. No chains, no walls, no king shouting from a golden chair. Just a code, a law, a silent agreement between riders in the night. And in the morning when you rise mount and ride again, you won't need to be told what to do. You'll already know. It starts with the sound of drums. Not the loud war drums, but a steady measured beat thudding softly against the morning air. You sit up rubbing the sleep from your eyes. You know what that rhythm means. Reinforcements. Or maybe replacements. The army is growing again. Today you witness the quiet miracle of Mongol recruitment, a process far more complex than grabbing peasants and handing them bows. It's a carefully layered blend of loyalty talent spotting and, yes, a healthy dose of strategic coercion. The core of the force, of course, is tribal. Every soldier here can trace his lineage to one of the original clans that followed Genghis Khan when he was just Temujin before the conquest, before the titles, back when unity was bought with blood and vision. These are the heart and bone of the army. Their loyalty isn't just to the empire, it's to the story of how the empire began. But as the empire grew, so did its needs. 100,000 Mongols, no matter how skilled, couldn't garrison every captured city or storm every fortified gate. So the recruitment widened. Former enemies were given options, die serve or disappear into the dust. Many chose to serve. Historians still argue whether Mongol expansion diluted their elite fighting strength or enhanced it with foreign specialists. What's clear from where you sit chewing a strip of salted goat as new recruits line up is that diversity has only sharpened the edge. You see them now freshly recruited horsemen from the Kipchak steppes, nervous-eyed foot soldiers from captured Chinese provinces, tall bearded warriors from the Caucasus. Some wear armor made from boiled leather, others carry round shields of lacquered wood. They all look wary. Who wouldn't? Here's a quirky tidbit: recruitment often took place on site. After a victory, officers would walk the battlefield, tapping the shoulders of survivors who fought bravely or showed discipline. You're Mongol now. Not an offer, a promotion. But it wasn't just a numbers game. Training mattered. Newcomers didn't get handed a bow and shoved into the fray. They were assigned to seasoned units trained in horsemanship signaling and the sacred art of pretending to flee. It could take months before they were combat ready. Sometimes longer, sometimes never. Not everyone makes it. You remember a young recruit from Khwarezm, barely old enough to grow a beard who tried to gallop in a straight line during a mock retreat. He panicked, veered off, and nearly trampled a cook fire. He ended up on latrine duty for a week, but he learned. You helped him, in fact. That's the Mongol way. Strength through integration or humiliation, usually both. And yes, there were slaves, but not always in chains. Some were former nobles offered life and limited freedom in exchange for service. Others were craftsmen, cooks, siege engineers. They didn't fight, but they built. Recruited from necessity, not ideology. One fringe detail orphans from conquered cities were often taken in, raised within the army, and trained as full soldiers. These weren't just charity cases, they were investments. By the time they reached adulthood, they spoke the language, knew the rules, and more importantly, felt they belonged. You overhear the officers today speaking in multiple tongues. Turkic, Chinese, even a smattering of Persian. Orders are translated and repeated down the line. It's not perfect, but it works. Every recruit is expected to learn basic commands in Mongolian. Misunderstanding an order in battle. That's not just a mistake. That's a funeral. Still, the army doesn't demand uniformity. You can keep your gods, your beard style, your cooking habits as long as you follow orders and fight like your life depends on it. Because it does. There's a ceremony tonight. The new recruits will be paired with veteran units. Not adopted exactly, but absorbed. You remember yours. A crusty sergeant from the Merkit tribe who smelled like boiled onion and never smiled. He taught you how to adjust your saddle without dismounting. Saved your life, probably. Recruitment isn't static. It flows with the Empire's needs. After a major campaign, the ranks might swell with captured prisoners, enthusiastic volunteers, or even defectors from opposing armies. Yes, defectors. Entire battalions have switched sides mid-siege. The Mongols don't just accept it, they plan for it. Tonight, as you help the new arrivals set up their tents, smaller, flimsier, but adequate, you catch a glimpse of fear in one boy's eyes. He's watching the horses, unsure which end kicks. You toss him a dried apple and point to the quietest mare in the lot. He nods, confused but grateful. One day he'll ride beside you, maybe. For now, he learns, you all do. And the army grows not just in number, but in knowledge, in accents, in styles, in scars. Each new warrior brings something to the table, a different way to fire a bow, a new type of saddle strap, a better way to dry meat. The army listens. The army remembers. That's how it survives. You hear them before you see them. Deep-throated laughs, the clatter of bone dice, the low hum of someone singing a war ballad in a language you don't recognize. You're approaching the Ordo, the traveling camp of a Mongol commander. Not just a general's tent, but a mobile court, a command center, and a social galaxy all its own. It sits at the center of the army's encampment, like a sun surrounded by disciplined planetary rings. Guard posts, kitchens, herds, smithies, everything arranged with geometric precision. If the main camp is efficient, the Ordo is exquisite. Its central yurt is massive, stitched from white felt and painted with ornate symbols, flames wolves' suns. The door always faces south, a tradition as old as the steppe winds. You duck as you enter, even though the doorway's high. Habit, respect. Inside, it's warm and dim. Thick carpets on the floor, silk banners fluttering faintly, a silver brazier glowing in the corner. There's a polished horse skull on a low table, ceremonial, not creepy. Probably. Seated near the back is the commander. Not slouching, not booming orders. Just sipping tea from a carved wooden cup while reviewing a map drawn on stretched deerskin. He looks up, gives the slightest nod, then returns to his work. This is leadership Mongol style. Quiet, Absolute. The Ordo isn't just the general's tent. It's a command organism with its own bureaucracy. Scribes, messengers, astrologers, quartermasters all nestled in surrounding yurts. Orders flow from this place like water from a spring, and everyone in the army drinks. Historians still debate whether the Mongol Ordo was influenced more by Chinese imperial camps or Central Asian tribal councils. Either way, it's a hybrid marvel, formal and mobile, spiritual and strategic. Outside warriors line up not to receive praise but instructions. Promotions, punishments, reassignments. You were once summoned here heart pounding like a war drum, only to be handed a new bowstring and told, "You're fast. Ride east." That was it. No ceremony, no congrats. Just trust in a direction. Here's a fringe tidbit: Mongol commanders often traveled with court astrologers who would read omens before battles. If the stars were wrong, the attack was delayed. Laugh if you like, but more than one army perished ignoring such advice. You don't win an empire by rushing into unlucky days, and the Ordo moves with the army. Every time the camp shifts, the central tent is among the first dismantled and the last to be repitched. Its location is always guarded, often rotated to confuse spies. You'll never find the commander in the same place twice in a row unless you're lost or in trouble. Security is tight but subtle. You don't see guards bristling with weapons. Instead, you see old veterans lounging nearby, cleaning their nails with daggers or adjusting stirrups. They don't need to look tough, they just are. And yes, there's luxury here. The commander's saddle is likely inlaid with silver. His best horse wears a jeweled browband. His tea probably steeped with dried jasmine, traded from China, or saffron from Persia. But it's not opulence, it's status. In a world where armies communicate across 10,000 kilometers, image matters. You're summoned once again to the Ordo, this time with your entire unit. Inside, a strategist unrolls a fresh map. Charcoal lines sketching enemy forts, red dots, for supply lines, blue arrows for expected weather patterns. No speech, just questions. Can your unit ride this ridge? Yes. Can you ford this river at night? Yes. Can you make it by dawn? A pause. Yes. That's the briefing. The meeting ends with a nod. You exit into the chill, knowing your orders, your route, your role in the larger storm. Here's a quirky fact: Ordos sometimes had traveling musicians. Not entertainers per se, more like bards who preserved victories in song, passed down unit histories, and reminded everyone of their ancestors' glory. You've heard one sing of your first campaign. You blush so hard your nose turned purple. The social life of the Ordo is surprisingly rich. Between missions, commanders host feasts strictly sober unless celebrating a major victory. Food is hearty, talk is blunt, and laughter comes easily among those who survived another siege together. But there are no illusions here. The Ordo also handles executions. You remember one night quiet as any other when a rider was brought before the commander. He had disobeyed a direct order. No one raised their voice. No one protested. The verdict came swiftly, and the sentence was carried out just outside the camp, with only the stars as witnesses. Justice isn't delayed in the Mongol world. It travels with you, sits beside you, and watches every decision you make. Tonight, as you return to your own small tent, little more than felt and hope, you glance back at the glowing dome of the Ordo. Inside, plans are forming. Empires are shifting. Your name may never be written in scrolls, but your footsteps trace their margins. You sleep lightly knowing tomorrow's orders will come from that quiet yurt, and you will ride. The fortress stands like a tooth in the landscape, tall, gray, jagged, with stone walls thick enough to laugh at arrows and high enough to make birds jealous. Once upon a time, this might have been the end of a Mongol campaign. But now it's just another engineering challenge. You've been assigned to the siege crew, and that means a crash course in borrowed brilliance. The Mongols didn't start as siege masters. You know this. Everyone does. Steppe warriors had no use for catapults or siege towers when their world was made of tents and grass. But the moment the empire pushed into city-states and walled kingdoms, the rules changed. So the Mongols did what they do best. They learned, and then they improved. Your current siege crew includes Chinese engineers captured during the conquest of Jin territory, a Persian architect with a gift for weight distribution, and a handful of disgruntled but incredibly talented Arab stonemasons who mutter to themselves constantly but build like they're possessed. Historians still debate whether the Mongols borrowed or commandeered this expertise, but let's be honest, you don't ask a genius if they want to join you after you burn their city. You tell them they work for the empire now, and then you feed them well and don't kill them. It's a convincing offer. Here's a fascinating tidbit. At one siege, the Mongols forced captured engineers to build massive trebuchets, giant slingshotting machines taller than a two-story house. When asked if they could be made faster, the lead engineer replied, "Yes, if we stop sleeping." So they did. You've seen all kinds of strange weapons, assembled siege towers on wheels, huge rams with iron-plated heads, flaming pots lobbed from mangonels. Your favorite so far is the Thunder Crash Bomb, a Chinese invention involving gunpowder packed in a ceramic shell. When it hits the ground, boom, stone cracks, men scream, horses bolt, and then there's the humble ladder. Underrated. Carved from local trees lashed together with raw hide and carried under cover of darkness. Simple. Effective. Especially when you send waves of men up every 5 minutes until the enemy either breaks or runs out of arrows. You've practiced with the sappers too, the tunnelers. These men dig beneath walls, bracing their shafts with wooden beams, then set fire to the supports. If all goes well, the wall collapses. If not, well, the grave is already halfway dug. One of the stranger siege tools in your kit. A portable shelter made of soaked leather called a tortoise, under which archers can crawl right up to the base of a wall without being boiled alive by oil or set ablaze by pitch. It stinks, but it works. Another offbeat trick, psychological warfare. Mongols have been known to catapult the severed heads of enemy soldiers back over the walls, or sometimes entire diseased animal carcasses. Once they launched flaming barrels filled with beehives. You'll never forget that sound. There's a rhythm to siege work. At dawn, you wake to the thud of hammers, the groan of pulleys, the creak of ropes under tension. By mid-morning, the air smells like smoke, sweat, and anticipation. And when the attack begins, the world becomes a thunderclap. Today, you help roll a battering ram into place. It takes 30 men and 4 oxen. The defenders above hurl rocks and insults. One of them calls you goat-born, which is oddly specific. You shrug. The goat had excellent stamina. Then comes the drumbeat, the signal. You move. Everything moves. Arrows fly in both directions. Stones crash down like angry gods. And somewhere far behind the line, the commander watches, calculating, deciding whether the walls will fall today or whether you'll try something new tomorrow. You've seen failures. A siege tower that caught fire before reaching the gate. A tunnel that collapsed with 20 men inside. A battering ram that veered off course and embedded itself in a patch of mud. War isn't tidy. It's muddy, smoky, and full of bugs. But the Mongols adapt. If a city's walls can't be breached, they starve it. No grain and no water out. Birds that fly over are shot down. Anyone who tries to sneak out at night is captured and questioned. Then they're either sent back in with lies or not sent back at all. And patience wins. Eventually, food runs out. Morale crumbles. Gates creak open, not with surrender, but with exhaustion. You ride in sword drawn, not always to kill, but to secure. Sometimes a city is spared. Sometimes it's made an example. The decision depends on its usefulness and whether it annoyed the commander. Tonight, back at camp, you sit near the engineers. They're already sketching new designs in the dirt. What if we angled the tower, one mutters. What if the stones were oiled, another asks. You don't follow all the math, but you appreciate the madness. The stars overhead glitter coldly, watching another fortified city tremble in the face of ingenuity and fire. You roll your shoulders, stretch out your legs, and glance back at the wall still standing in the distance. Tomorrow it won't be. It starts with a rumble beneath your feet, not thunder, not horses. Something deeper. You crouch palm pressed to the soil and feel it, the unmistakable vibration of sappers tunneling beneath stone. Above, the sky is smudged with smoke. Flaming arrows rise and fall in parabolic grace. They hiss as they meet. Thatch roofs hiss again as buckets of water splash upward. The city still holds. But it's only a matter of time now. You can feel it. Literally. The Mongols have cracked open many cities with bows and cunning alone. But when that fails, they go underground. You've worked with the sappers once or twice. It's a strange profession, half engineering, half faith. Armed with picks, shovels, and planks, they tunnel beneath city walls, propping up the shaft as they go, knowing full well the ceiling might collapse at any moment. If they're lucky, they reach the foundation. Then they stuff the space with dry wood, set it to blaze, and run like the wind. When it works, it's glorious. The wall collapses with a roar, stones tumbling outward like angry dice. Dust rises, shouts echo, and the breach becomes your front door. Historians still argue whether the Mongols borrowed these tactics from Chinese or Middle Eastern engineers. But in truth, they absorbed techniques from everywhere. Siegecraft became a global collaboration, run by fear, funded by loot, and powered by fire. You step over to one of the tortoise shelters. It's low, crude, and smells like goat sweat and soaked leather. You duck beneath it with 3 other archers. It's your job to keep defenders on the walls busy while the sappers do their work. You fire upward in quick succession, snap, draw loosed, and arrows answer from above, some glancing off the curved top with a worrying twang. You shift your position. The shelter inches forward, pushed on small wheels. It creaks like an old man but keeps moving. Arrows whistle overhead. One sticks in the ground by your knee. Another pierces a gap in the shelter and lodges in a fellow archer's boot. He swears softly, unfazed. Then comes the sound you've been waiting for: drums. Not loud, not fast, just a low, steady rhythm. 1, 2. 1, 2. It means the wall is ready. You fall back, keeping low. By the time you reach the rear lines, the torches are already being passed forward. One sapper steps out, face blackened with soot, and gives a quick nod. The kind of nod that says, "We lit it." Then comes a silence. Everyone watches. And then the world collapses. The ground trembles. The air splits with a crack. The wall buckles inward, then outward, then down. Stones the size of carts burst apart, and a massive plume of dust shoots into the sky. For a heartbeat, the city is swallowed in gray. And that's your signal. You charge. Through the smoke and debris you run, not with the headlong scream of a berserker, but with the surgical precision of a practiced predator. You climb over rubble, step past charred beams, eyes searching for the first defenders through the haze. You find them half choked by dust, shielding their faces, still unsure whether they're alive or dead. You loose arrows into their confusion, clearing a path for the foot soldiers behind you. There's no time to think, only move. Here's a quirky tidbit sometimes before the final assault, Mongol commanders would order pots filled with burning pitch and animal fat to be lobbed over walls. The fire sticks. The smell indescribable, but it clears defenders off parapets like nothing else. You pass a gatehouse with iron-banded doors still half shut. Someone hurls a grappling hook over the top. Another soldier hoists himself up like a spider. The city is no longer resisting, it's reeling. And then comes the drumbeat again, faster now. You halt, everyone halts. Confused maybe, but obedient. Because the signal means regroup. This is no mindless massacre. The chaos is tightly choreographed. You fall back to the newly opened gate where fresh cavalry pours in. They'll secure the center. Your job was to crack the shell. Now someone else stirs the yolk. As the dust begins to settle, you wipe soot from your face and glance upward. The walls that seemed eternal this morning are now just crumbling silhouettes. Smoke curls from the rooftops. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls once. Then silence. Later that evening, you sit beside a small fire just beyond the ruined gate. Your comrades laugh quietly, comparing bruises passing around a skin of wine looted from a governor's pantry. You listen to the engineers discussing what they'll do next time. More tunnel braces, one mutters. Less pitch, another grumbles, rubbing his singed eyebrows. Here's an odd detail to file away: some Mongol siege crews used large drums tuned to different pitches to communicate in real time during combat. Not just when to attack, but how. 3 low beats might signal ladders on the north wall. A high roll time to light the tunnels. It's music, but with consequences. You fall asleep that night with your back to a pile of loose stone, the cracked skeleton of a once proud fortress. You dream of tunnels dark and narrow, and the moment when the roof gives way to daylight and screams. And when you wake, there will be another city, another wall, another rumble beneath your feet. You've crossed mountains, dunes, and windswept plains, but now you face something different. A river, wide, brown, lazy-looking but treacherous. The kind that swallows horses' gear and men without blinking. You're not worried. This isn't the first river the Mongol army has had to cross, and it won't be the last. By now, you've got more tricks than a traveling magician. You glance to your left and right, fellow soldiers already unbuckling saddles, tightening belts, shouting short orders in half a dozen languages. You all know what to do. The Mongols don't just fight on land, they dominate it, and that includes whatever water dares to stand in their way. Here's the first thing: you don't just wade across. You plan. Scouts rode ahead days ago to find the best fording spot, test the depth, and watch the current. Sometimes they toss in a sheep carcass and count how long it takes to float downstream. It's science. Step style. And now you turn saddlebags into flotation devices. You lash gear to inflated skins, goat bladders, or greased hides, tied at the ends and puffed with air. They bob like strange animals in the shallows, holding up bows, arrows, and whatever loot you've kept dry since the last raid. You strip to a light tunic. Heavy clothes drag. Armor stays bundled on the rafts. Your horse trained to swim. You hold its mane loosely, guiding it across while kicking gently with your legs. You've done this before. The horse swims like it was born in water. Here's a quirky tidbit. Mongol horses often had their nostrils stuffed with buttered wool before a river crossing. It helped keep out water and prevented panic. Smelled weird, worked great. You glance upstream and see another unit already halfway across, silent, steady, moving like a ghost battalion. No shouting, no splashing, just gliding across the current in slow motion. Historians still debate whether the Mongols developed these techniques from early Siberian tribes or learned them during campaigns against Chinese river systems. Either way, the results speak for themselves. Where most armies stall at a river, yours accelerates. Of course not. Every crossing goes perfectly. One of your companions loses a pack to a sudden current. You both dive for it because there's a full week's dried meat and a silver flask inside. You recover it coughing up water and laughing like idiots. The river can try. You're not letting go of lunch. When the opposite shore rises beneath your feet, you pull yourself up dripping and freezing. But the gear is intact. The horses shake off water like dogs. Within minutes, you're redressing checking arrows and ready to move. You rest for a moment under a small grove of trees, watching the rest of your company drift across. Some float on makeshift rafts cobbled together with logs and rope. Others ride directly through shallows farther upstream water up to the horses' chests. And for special crossings, the Mongols have floating bridges. Yes, bridges. You saw one built last year near the Kura River. Logs bound together with lashings of rawhide stretched between tethered rafts made from inflated hides. It held dozens of riders at once. The entire construction floated like a lazy snake across the current. Took only a day to build, lasted a week, just long enough. You remember marching across that bridge in eerie silence. Beneath your feet, the river swirled, muttering ancient curses. But the structure held. On the far side, enemy scouts were still repositioning, thinking you'd take another route. You didn't, you were already behind them. Here's another odd tactic sometimes. If a surprise was needed, the army would pretend to fail at a crossing, make a noisy show of trying, then retreat in frustration. At night, they'd sneak back upstream, cross silently, and attack at dawn from the wrong side. Worked every time. The fish never saw it coming either. Tonight, you camp near the riverbank. Wet socks drying near low fire armor glinting dully in the moonlight. You hear frogs, crickets. The distant splash of one last horse making it across. A new recruit grumbles about the mud. You shrug. Mud washes off, you say. Failure doesn't. He gets quiet. He'll learn. You sleep well, bellyful fingers sore from rope work. And when you dream of rivers not as barriers but as highways. Because for a Mongol army, water is just another trail to follow. Tomorrow you'll ride again. Dry, sharp-eyed, ready. And if there's another river, let it try. You are not alone. Not just in the literal sense, though. There are thousands of riders at your back, but in the more unsettling way, you are always being watched by someone, by many someones. Scouts, spies, messengers, informants. Mongol intelligence doesn't ride in formation. It weaves in and out of borders, slips through city gates, smiles in market stalls, and listens while disguised as merchants, monks, even musicians. If war is a game, you're not playing blindfolded. You've read the opponent's mail, studied their breakfast routine, and maybe even whispered advice to their chamberlain. This is how campaigns are won before they begin. You've served scout duty once, cold, quiet days on the edge of enemy territory, wrapped in rags to blend with the locals. Eyes scanning for movement, ears trained to the way distant hooves sound in frozen air. You didn't speak for 3 days, just listened, just watched. The Mongols scout everything. Terrain, supply lines, morale, weather. Before the main army moves, dozens, sometimes hundreds of small teams sweep through the region. Not just to find targets, but to understand them. Where do the wells lie? Which roads flood in spring? What villages hate their overlords and might open the gates? Here's a quirky tidbit. Scouts were trained to recognize distant landmarks by scent and sound. That grove of trees smells like hawthorn. That ridge echoes differently when you shout. That river hums when it's full. You could navigate blindfolded if needed, and when you can't scout ahead, you ask, or interrogate, or bribe. Mongol intelligence is pragmatic. You've watched commanders offer captured couriers gold and freedom in exchange for news. Some accept, some don't. The ones who lie are usually easy to spot. They don't smile with their eyes. Information flows fast. Thanks to the yam, the Mongol postal system messages can cross hundreds of kilometers in a matter of days. Relay stations dot the empire like beads on a necklace. Each holds fresh horses' supplies and trusted riders who know not to read what they carry, or at least not to admit it. Historians still debate whether the Mongols' intelligence system was a planned bureaucracy or an improvised miracle. You know the truth, it's both. And neither, it's whatever works. You remember one mission, well, a long ride through enemy territory posing as a caravan guard. You counted troop numbers, noted the shape of battlements, measured the mood of villagers. You even bought an apple in the market just to hear what the grocer would complain about. Spoiler taxes. Sometimes spies were embedded for years, whole identities crafted from scratch. A friendly merchant here, a wandering scholar there. Cities fell to warriors they never even saw because someone inside whispered when to open the gates. Here's another fringe detail: falconers. Yes, actual bird handlers. Mongols used trained falcons not only for hunting, but as signaling tools. If a falcon flew in a particular pattern, it meant the coast was clear. A dive from a certain height might signal danger. It sounds ridiculous until you see it work. Tonight, a messenger arrives just before dusk, breathless and dust-covered. He's ridden hard. The seal on his scroll is still intact. The commander reads it in silence, nods once, and hands it to a nearby officer. A moment later, your unit is shifting westward, just like that. No arguments, no briefings. You trust the message. You trust the system. Because this army doesn't march blindly. It knows. It always knows. And if it doesn't, it finds out. You've even heard rumors, wild ones, that Mongol agents reach cities far ahead of the main army and spread panic by whispering of a coming horde. That people fled before a single hoofbeat reached the gates. Psychological warfare with a hint of gossip. Sometimes the best blade is the one you don't need to draw. You settle down that night with your map in hand, the ink still drying. You trace rivers, mark supply routes, circle the names of cities you've never seen. You're not guessing. You're planning. Because tomorrow you'll ride straight to where the enemy isn't and wait. They won't see you. Not until it's far, far too late. You ride with orders that span continents, across hills, through river crossings, past ruins where old battles sleep in the soil. But when the drums beat and the flags flutter, everyone knows what to do instantly in perfect, terrifying unison. Why? Because the Mongol army doesn't speak one language, it speaks 9. You look around your unit, one man mumbles in Uyghur. Another curses in Kipchak, a third hums a Chinese lullaby under his breath. You all understand the commands, but your tongues are not the same. This is the world's most multilingual army. It has to be. The Mongol Empire is a stitched-together quilt of peoples, cultures, and conquered professionals. Horsemen from the steppes, archers from the forests, siege engineers from the Persian Gulf, cooks from Baghdad, translators from Korea. You don't just fight alongside them, you need them. That's why at every level of command there are interpreters. Sometimes 2 or 3 in a chain, repeating orders across languages like a human telephone. A general gives an instruction in Mongolian, it's translated into Turkic, then into Chinese or Persian, and finally into the dialect of the man holding the ladder. And yet, it works. Historians still argue whether this system was efficient or a glorious mess. You've seen it in action, it's both. But more often than not, the sheer force of the decimal hierarchy smooths it all out. If 10 men understand their leader and that leader understands his commander, the line holds. Always. Here's a quirky tidbit. New recruits are drilled in Mongolian commands even if they speak no Mongolian. Turn left, draw bow, retreat, form up. You've heard a Georgian who couldn't ask for water in Mongolian still shout a perfect shoot on command. It's functional language learning accelerated by urgency. And there's more than just verbal communication. Signals fill the gaps colored flags for flanking red ribbons, tied to officers' bows for charging fire beacons at night, drumming patterns that speak volumes. Even the beat of hooves can signal intent. You've ridden in formations where you felt the change before you saw it. Your commander, a man named Korchi, speaks 5 languages. Badly, but with enough force that no one corrects him. He once explained a flanking maneuver by drawing lines in the dirt and miming horse noises. Somehow it worked. You took the ridge. The enemy took a nap. Forever. And this communication system isn't just for war, it's for administration. You've watched scribes copy orders in 3 scripts side by side, Uyghur Mongolian Chinese characters and Persian cursive. That same parchment might travel 1,000 kilometers read by governors who will never meet each other but who obey the same empire. There's another layer: sign names. Officers and units often carry unique symbols drawn on shields carved into bows inked onto horses to ensure identification at a glance. It's like wearing your business card into battle. Sometimes it even has a slogan. Yours says, like wind, then storm. Here's a fringe fact. Some Mongol generals carried a board strapped to their saddle with small tokens on it representing units. They'd rearrange them during battle to plan movements like a game of chess, then use that layout to give rapid orders to runners and signalers. Tactics as tabletop wargaming. Still, things go wrong. You once saw an entire unit of recently conscripted soldiers charge the wrong side of a riverbank. A translation delay, a dust-choked flag, the result, confusion, casualties, a quiet burial. But the Mongols adapt. They always adapt. That night you sit with soldiers from 4 regions. One jokes in Persian, another grunts in a northern dialect of Chinese. A Kipchak offers dried berries, holding out his palm wordlessly. You nod, take one, and raise your water skin in silent thanks. You don't speak the same language, but you understand each other, and that's the secret. Not perfect words, but shared rhythm. Tomorrow, when the horns sound and the flags rise, you'll ride as one, speaking with hooves, arrows, and a common purpose that needs no dictionary. The gates are broken. The walls are ash. You step over a shattered cart past a well still smoking into a city that no longer resists. It's over. The battle is done. Now comes the harder part: what happens next. Victory for the Mongol army is not just about conquest, it's about aftermath. Rebuilding, assessing, cataloging, and yes, sometimes cleansing. You begin with the count. You and your unit, still splattered with soot and mud, are assigned to the census team. That may sound bureaucratic, but it's anything but dull. You're walking through ruined streets making notes: how many survivors, how many homes intact, how many looms, how many goats. Every broken jar and empty barrel becomes a data point. You record everything. That's Mongol policy after the storm takes stock. Historians still debate whether this obsession with numbers came from Chinese influence or was baked into Mongol planning from the start. But out here, wading through rubble and questioning terrified townsfolk, it feels like administration by necessity. Here's a quirky tidbit after major victories. Mongols often held mobile censuses, not just counting people, but categorizing them by skill. Can you write? Can you mend saddles? Do you know how to make bricks that don't crumble in the rain? Those who answered yes usually got fed. Those who said no, let's just say their future depended on the mood of the officer asking. You find a group of scribes huddled in the remains of a market square, nervously writing down the names of local officials. One soldier reads them aloud while another cross-references with a pre-written list. You spot three names already circled in red. Probably collaborators or resistance leaders or just unlucky. Punishment comes swiftly. You pass a street where a group of captured men are digging a pit wide shallow. A commander nearby is speaking to them in clipped tones. One man collapses, another tries to run. An arrow catches him before his second step. Efficiency, even in death. You turn away. Sometimes the city is spared. If it surrendered early, if it proved valuable, if it housed a scholar or engineer too important to lose. But if it resisted, the price is high. Not just in lives, but in legacy. Libraries burn, temples crumble, names vanish. There's a phrase passed around campfires: to resist is to remember. To submit is to survive. It's not official doctrine, but it might as well be. Here's another grim but true detail. Mongols occasionally built pyramids of skulls outside ruined cities. Not out of bloodlust, but as messages. We were here. This is what happened. Tell others. You've seen one before, neatly arranged, sun-bleached. A silent monument to cause and effect. But it's not all killing, not anymore. Tonight a Persian physician is brought before your commander. He's flanked by two trembling apprentices and clutches a bundle of herbs and scrolls. He bows low, not from fear but reverence. He knows his knowledge will be spared, maybe even protected. The Mongols, after all, don't destroy usefulness. You've seen entire districts preserved because they housed silk weavers, coin forgers, or astronomers. You've marched with translators who speak 6 tongues and saw them treated like royalty. The army burns what slows it down, but nurtures what moves it forward. And then comes the administrative wave. Mongol governors Daragachi arrive within days, sometimes hours. They're lean men with sharp eyes and sharper pencils. They bring tax quotas, legal codes, and horses full of stamped documents. Order grows from ash. Sometimes they even reopen schools. You help mark buildings for preservation. Anything stone-built. Anything that can serve as a barracks or stable. Tents go up in courtyards. Horses drink from noble fountains. A boy offers you bread from a burned bakery. You accept it silently. As the sun sets, you hear music, a strange, mournful tune plucked on a Persian cedar. A soldier sits nearby, humming softly. Behind him, a stack of confiscated books rests under a tarp. They'll be sent to Karakoram. Knowledge doesn't burn if it can ride. That's the final twist the Mongols destroy in order to control. But once control is won, they often preserve more than their enemies did. Trade routes are protected. Taxes are enforced brutally, yes, but predictably. And merchants. Merchants flourish. You've seen entire cities reborn within years. Under a different name, perhaps, but alive. You lay your head down that night beside a former city gate, now just splinters. You think of all that has passed in a single day. The fear, the chaos, the silence, the order, and somewhere in the distance a survivor begins sweeping the steps of a half-burnt temple. Because this too is part of victory. You're ankle-deep in grain. Literally. The spoils of victory don't always glitter. Sometimes they rattle and roll like the contents of this cracked storeroom, spilling out across the dusty floor sacks of barley bales of wool. Bundles of dried fish tied in neat rows. A city has fallen, and now comes the ancient question, who gets what? Loot is not chaos, not in the Mongol army. There's a system, a deeply serious one, because when your empire spans deserts, rivers, and thousands of hooves, fairness isn't just nice, it's survival. You remember your first campaign. You thought loot meant grabbing whatever shiny object you could carry. You learned better. Fast. A commander saw you tucking a silver candlestick into your robe and gently reminded you with the blunt side of a spear that all loot is catalogued. First, the city is secured. Then the surveyors move in. They mark valuables, gold, textiles, livestock, weapons, tools. They tag and tally everything as if they're preparing for a bizarre mobile auction. It's astonishing how organized a conquering army can be. Then comes the division. Historians still argue whether Mongol loot systems were based on traditional tribal codes or developed under Genghis Khan's specific reforms. Either way, they're unmistakably Mongol strict hierarchical and absolutely enforced. Here's the breakdown. First, shares go to the Great Khan or to the commander in his name. Then the generals, then officers, and finally down to the common soldiers. But even the lowest man gets something. Always. If you fought, you eat. You don't get rich, but you don't get left out either. Here's a quirky tidbit sometimes spoils included people not just for labor or ransom, but for talent. A city's best falconer, for example, might be given to a favored officer. The man would become part of the household, protected and even paid. His job, catch birds. His reality, property. You've seen weirder. One soldier once requested ownership of a particular goat that had refused to flee during a siege. He claimed it was a sign from the spirits. The commanders rolled their eyes but granted the request. The goat lived in his tent for 2 years. After loot is divided, a special inventory is made written down by scribes in multiple languages recorded for tax purposes. Some of it is sent to Karakoram, some to supply depots. Some, the best and rarest, vanishes quietly into noble hands. You don't ask where it goes, you don't want to ask. You once helped guard a caravan transporting looted goods from Bukhara to the capital. Silk bolts, porcelain vases, horses with silver-threaded harnesses. The guards were selected not for loyalty but for literacy so they could verify the cargo list. You rode alongside crates worth more than entire villages, and you were terrified the whole way. Still, not everything is shiny. Loot also includes tools carts, even barrels of vinegar. Practical goods are prized. A good anvil might earn more praise than a gold ring. If it can be used, it's valuable. Mongols are nothing if not practical. There's a common joke among veterans: he who loots a mirror loots only regret, because there's no use for mirrors on the steppe. They shatter. They reflect sun into your eyes, and let's be honest, no one looks good after 10 days in armor and horse sweat. Sometimes disagreements happen. A soldier claims he found a ring fair and square. Another says it came from his assigned quarter of the city. They don't duel. They report to a Karachu officer who listens, nods, and either splits the object or assigns it based on merit. The loser accepts it. Usually, the system works because it's enforced ruthlessly. Once a lieutenant tried to smuggle out a pouch of stolen gems. He was caught, tried, and hanged. His body was left displayed beside the loot tent. No one touched his boots. Another fringe fact: certain luxury goods, jade rare manuscripts, religious relics were earmarked for special review. Sometimes the Khan himself would decide their fate, not for spiritual reasons, for prestige. These items often ended up as diplomatic gifts, proof of Mongol reach. Tonight the loot is being counted by firelight. You watch as a soldier unrolls the silk carpet with a sigh of longing, then hands it to a scribe without hesitation. He'll get his portion later, maybe a new saddle, maybe a pouch of coins, maybe just a goat. Either way, it's fair. You sit back and drink from a wineskin you did earn, taken from a cellar after the city fell. The wine is bitter spiced, probably old. You toast the moon with it anyway, because out here fairness isn't sentimental. It's what keeps the army together. You've seen wounds before. Arrow shafts jutting from shoulders. Crushed ribs beneath dented lamellar. Burns. Cracks. bruises in colors you didn't know skin could make. But out here, there are no hospitals. There are no surgeons in crisp white coats. There's just what the army carries on horseback in pouches and memory. This is Mongol field medicine. Improvised, portable, and disturbingly effective. You sit now beside a wounded comrade, his leg wrapped tightly in oiled felt, the binding already stained dark. A small pot boils nearby, filled with herbs that smell sharp and bitter like old vinegar and burnt leaves. A healer squats next to the pot, expression calm, hands stained with salve. There's no hesitation. The wound is cleaned with warm water and strong spirits, usually fermented mare's milk that burns like fire. The soldier winces, bites down on a leather strap, and groans as the healer applies a poultice of crushed roots and goose fat. You watch fascinated and mildly nauseous. Historians still debate whether Mongol medicine was superior to that of their more civilized neighbors. But you've seen both, and the Mongols aren't guessing. Their knowledge runs deep, drawn from shamanic rituals, Chinese herb lore, Turkic massage techniques, and pure battlefield necessity. Here's a quirky tidbit. Mongols believed in wind illness, the idea that invisible forces could enter the body and cause imbalance. Healers often use smoke chants or even whistling arrows placed under the bed to drive it out. Laugh if you want. But you once had a fever, and after a session with a shaman who burned goat hair and muttered to the stars, you got better. You've tasted their remedies too. Infusions of licorice root, wild garlic, chewed raw dried sheep. Stomach powder mixed with hot water. Most of it is vile. All of it works, eventually. For more serious wounds, cauterization is the go-to. A red-hot iron pressed against the flesh to seal it shut. You've smelled it before. Burning skin has a specific tang part. Meat part horror, but it saves lives. That's what matters. Broken bones. Set with carved splints from yew wood bound with sinew. Mongol healers can realign a thigh bone by feel alone, then bind it tight with layers of felt. You've even heard of mobile traction setups two horses use to gently pull a dislocated limb back into place. No, really, it works, mostly. And when infection threatens, there's moxa. Little cones of dried mugwort burned near the skin to draw out toxins. The first time you tried it, you thought you were being branded. Now you find the smell oddly comforting, like burning hay and safety. Here's another fringe fact. Mongol camps often had designated bone men specialists in joint and bone injuries. They weren't just medics, they were craftspeople. Some could carve replacement teeth from horn or reset a jaw while humming a battle song. Medicine in the field extends to horses too. You've seen riders stop mid-march to inspect a mount's hooves, packing small wounds with honey and ashes to prevent rot. A limping horse gets better treatment than some humans do in other armies. After all, the horse is half the soldier. There's also ritual and healing. Shamans sometimes lay out animal bones in specific patterns to divine whether a man will survive. If the omens are poor, the patient may still be treated, but everyone starts preparing the funeral anyway. You once saw a man recover despite a bad reading. The shaman claimed it was because the bones had been wet. No one questioned it. Rest is medicine, too. After a brutal campaign, entire units are pulled back for 2 weeks of recovery under the care of older warriors, herbalists, and occasionally traveling monks from China or Tibet who bring with them scrolls filled with drawings of organs and celestial charts. You once watched a monk treat a poisoned soldier using nothing but acupuncture and boiled beetle shells. He lived. You still don't know how. You've learned a few tricks yourself. You carry powdered willow bark for pain. You know how to make a compress from wet moss and horse dung. Don't ask, just know it works. And you can stitch a wound with sinew, though your lines are never quite straight. Tonight you help wrap a friend's cracked ribs. He grunts with every twist, swears in 3 languages, then thanks you with a nod. No drama, no fear, just another day under the stars holding things together. Because out here, healing isn't about perfection, it's about function. You patch, you brace, you ride again. And when you can't ride, someone carries you. That's the Mongol way. You stir awake to the smell of smoke, not from fire, but from incense, sweet and sharp, curling out from a nearby tent where a shaman is whispering to spirits. Someone's had a dream, or an omen, or maybe just a stomach ache and decided to blame it on a ghost. Out here, religion is everywhere and nowhere. It's not a sermon or a cathedral. It's in the way you ride, the way you eat, the charm stitched into your coat, the way you avoid cutting meat from the spine of an animal because it offends the earth spirits. The Mongol army is a marching mosaic of faiths. You travel with shamans, yes, but also Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, Taoists, even a few fire-worshipping Zoroastrians. It should be chaos. Instead, it's calm, tolerant, surprisingly peaceful. Why? Because the Khan demands it. Genghis Khan and his successors understood something: simple gods are useful, but obedience is vital. You can worship any deity you like as long as you follow orders, pay taxes, and don't insult anyone else's spirits too loudly. Historians still debate whether this tolerance was born of pragmatism or philosophy. From your saddle, it feels like both. Let people pray. Let them bring their temples and relics and sacred scrolls. Just make sure they fight when told. You wear a small charm tied into your sleeve-braided horsehair, a sliver of bone and a hawk feather. Your mother gave it to you before your first campaign. She told you it would keep your soul from leaking out through your ears. You've never tested that theory, but you keep it close. Here's a quirky tidbit: some Mongol warriors carried pieces of meteorite iron around their necks, believing the sky stone connected them to Tengri, the eternal blue sky. It wasn't just faith, it was cosmic alignment, divine legitimacy from above. And, well, who doesn't want a little star power in battle? Religion influences tactics too. Before major campaigns, shamans performed divinations, scattering bones, studying smoke, even listening to the calls of owls. A favorable omen can greenlight a siege. A bad one might delay an invasion by weeks. You've waited days while a storm cloud hovered in the wrong shape. But don't mistake tolerance for softness. You've seen idols toppled temples, stripped priests executed when they resisted. Faith is free, but rebellion is not. Some cities that clung too tightly to their sacred walls met fire just like any others. And yet when a captured priest proves useful, he's fed, protected, even honored. You once saw a Nestorian Christian bishop riding under the same banner as a Buddhist monk and a Muslim imam. They argued over dinner, then they toasted each other with mare's milk and moved on. The Mongols don't standardize religion, they absorb it. Here's a fringe fact. Kublai Khan kept a court astrologer from Baghdad, a Tibetan lama, and a Confucian scholar, all of whom claimed to have the Khan's ear. They probably did. And probably didn't. Politics and piety make strange bedfellows. Even on the road you feel the pull of belief. When you cross a mountain pass, someone tosses a pinch of flour to the wind. When a horse dies, you bury a lock of its mane and whisper a prayer. When lightning strikes too close, you tie a red ribbon to your spear and sleep with it under your blanket. Religion is woven into daily life, subtle and constant like thread through wool. It's not something you do once a week, it's something you are. And sometimes in the dead of night, when the camp is quiet and the wind shifts just right, you hear someone praying softly. In Persian, in Chinese, in Mongolian, the words change, but the tone doesn't. Hope, fear, gratitude, all the same. Tonight there's a ceremony near the commander's tent. A fire built from cedar. a chant rising into the air. You don't know the words, but you feel the meaning. A soldier has died not from battle, but from fever. His soul needs guidance. A shaman waves burning grass, circles the fire 3 times, and then scatters embers into the sky. No tears, just ritual. You bow your head not because you're commanded to, but because it feels right. Because in this army, faith marches beside steel, and every step you take carries the weight of 1,000 whispered prayers. Some yours, some not, but all moving forward. You're riding alongside a man who once engineered aqueducts in Baghdad. He doesn't look like much now, beard-matted robe patched at the elbows, a wheezy horse under him. But last month he built a bridge across a ravine in 3 days using only local wood pulleys and sheer stubbornness. He's not Mongol, but he's part of the Mongol army. This is the secret weapon no one expects foreign talent. After a victory, the army doesn't just take loot, it takes people, especially those with skills. Engineers, artisans, smiths, scribes, even stargazers. You've seen Chinese gunpowder experts slink out from the back of a camp tent, faces still smudged from testing their latest invention, black spheres filled with fire and fright. You've seen Armenian carpenters bending wood into impossible curves to reinforce siege engines. You've met a Syrian doctor who can stitch wounds so precisely it looks like embroidery. They don't always come willingly, but once they're here, they stay. Why? Because the Mongols protect what they value. A skilled prisoner often ends up with better food and housing than a regular soldier. Not luxury, just respect. Historians still argue whether this recruitment was enlightened cultural policy or ruthless exploitation. You know the answer? Yes, it's both. You pass a mobile forge manned by 2 brothers from Nishapur. They wear aprons stitched with symbols you don't recognize and argue constantly about heat and wind direction. But their arrowheads fly straighter than any others. You've used them. You don't care how often they bicker. Here's a quirky tidbit: in one famous siege, a Chinese engineer designed a giant stone-throwing machine so effective that Mongol officers gave him a title land and 20 sheep. He named the machine after his wife, which was awkward because she'd been in the city they just conquered. And it's not just engineers. You remember a tailor from Samarkand who altered saddles for long-distance comfort, adjusting the leather padding and adding loops for hanging tools? That tweak spread through the ranks like wildfire. The man got a silk robe and a new horse. Not bad for a guy who started the week mending boots. Captured blacksmiths are highly prized. Some are even assigned personal guards to keep them from being borrowed by other units. You saw a fight once, 2 officers arguing over which unit got to keep a master farrier who could shoe a horse in under 5 minutes. The compromise, the man rotated camps like a very tired, very valuable ambassador. But not all labor is skilled. Some prisoners are assigned to dig latrines, haul water, build barricades. The army calls them compers camp labor. They're not tortured, just worked. Fed just enough, housed just well enough, and watched. You've spoken to a few. Some hate you, some don't. Most just want to live. There's a fine line between laborer and craftsman. Sometimes it's talent, sometimes luck. You once saw a potter carving patterns into a bowl during a rest day. An officer spotted it, asked for a matching set. 2 days later, the potter had a new job making gifts for the commander's court. And they keep coming. Every city adds new hands, new voices. You hear languages in camp. You can't place deep, vowel-heavy tongues or staccato bursts of syllables. But everyone learns the same words first: food, horse, fire, go. Here's a fringe fact. Some Mongol units had full-time interpreters not just for battlefield use, but for managing these polyglot communities. These interpreters became power brokers, peacekeepers, sometimes even executioners. You once watched one settle a dispute over a wheelbarrow using 3 languages and a glare. The system isn't perfect. There are abuses, there are accidents, there are quiet disappearances in the night, but there's also respect. Because the army knows it can't win with arrows alone. Tonight you sit near a fire lit by flint struck from stones carried all the way from the Caucasus. A captured builder from Aleppo hands you a cup of bitter tea. A scribe from Bukhara scribbles notes by the light of a waxy torch. The stars above don't care what languages you speak, but you do. You look around and see an empire forming not just from conquest, but from assembly. Bits and pieces from everywhere woven together with blood fire and ingenuity. And tomorrow those same hands that once defended walls will build your bridges. And they'll hold. The dust of conquest has settled. The cities are silent, the flags planted, and the horses fed. But the Mongol army doesn't stop, not really. The empire doesn't pause to admire itself in the mirror. It pivots. You're no longer just a raider now. You're becoming something stranger. Something administrative. This is the part most people don't imagine the Mongol army transforming from a whirlwind of arrows and hooves into a functioning government. Steppe nomads becoming governors. Raiders morphing into tax collectors. The battlefield replaced by ledgers and schedules. And you're part of it. You've been assigned to help supervise a grain shipment. It's not glamorous, no flaming arrows or crumbling walls. Just crates, boats, scribes, and a lot of men arguing about measurements. But this is the new war logistics diplomacy control. Conquering is fast, ruling is exhausting, and yet the Mongols excel at it. Historians still debate whether the Mongol transformation from steppe warriors to empire administrators was accidental brilliance or part of Genghis Khan's original plan. Either way, the effect is undeniable. You've seen it happen city by city, region by region. Take Karakorum. What started as a collection of tents became a city of craftsmen, roads, palaces, and foreign embassies. You once met a Venetian there who was just as confused to see a well-organized street grid as you were. Here's a quirky tidbit: Mongol rulers adopted Persian and Chinese bureaucratic models, layered tax systems, census techniques, agricultural oversight. But they added their own flair: mobile courts, rotating officials, and punishment by horseback for corrupt scribes. Even the postal system changed. What began as a military communication network evolved into a commercial artery. The Yam now carries letters, trade contracts, and tax forms, not just war orders. Merchants love it. So do spies. And speaking of merchants, the Mongols protect them vigorously. You once guarded a caravan loaded with silk porcelain and wax tablets? Bandits tried to strike. They didn't try again. In return, the empire collects tolls and taxes. The roads stay open. You remember a city that resisted for weeks. After it fell, a governor was appointed. Not a general. A quiet man with ink-stained fingers and a memory for numbers. Within months, the city had markets again, a school reopened, and the sewers repaired. The people paid taxes. Grumbled, yes, but they didn't rebel. You've seen new systems bloom from ruins, standardized weights and measures enforced road patrols, translated edicts nailed to doors in 3 languages. The Mongol Empire doesn't just occupy, it integrates. Here's another offbeat fact. Some Mongol rulers adopted local religions to legitimize their authority. In China, they studied Confucian texts. In Persia, they built mosques. In Russia, they learned to tolerate Orthodox bishops as long as the tribute came on time. You feel the shift even in the army. Veteran warriors are being rotated out, assigned to garrisons. New recruits trained not just in combat, but in civil duties. There are workshops now, literal classes where soldiers learn to tally livestock, estimate crop yields, resolve disputes. One of your comrades recently settled an argument between two farmers over irrigation rights. He used his spear to draw the boundary in the dirt. It worked. And you're learning to read more than just maps. You've begun recognizing the symbols on tax records. You know which provinces produce what grain in the valleys, salt in the lakes, wool on the steppes. You've even helped draft a census once. It felt strange, powerful, quiet. You hear stories of others doing the same. A former siege commander now oversees coin minting. A cavalry officer tracks border crossings and collects tolls. The empire doesn't waste talent, it repurposes it. But don't mistake this for softness. The Mongol rule is harsh when challenged. Rebellions are crushed quickly. But if you obey, you can live, trade, thrive. You've seen it happen too many times to doubt it. Tonight you sit with a group of scribes under a tent lit by oil lamps. They're translating Persian tax documents into Uyghur script. One offers you a date from a silver bowl. You take it. Sweet, unexpected. You sip warm tea and stare at the ledgers. Rows and rows of symbols, numbers, names. This is your new battlefield. Not of blood, but of ink. Because an empire built by hooves now stands on paper. And you are its soldier still. The fire crackles low tonight. Not the roaring blaze of celebration, but a quiet, steady burn. One that gives more light than heat. Around it, your comrades sit cross-legged voices. Soft movements slow, like the air itself has grown heavy with memory. There's no enemy to chase. No walls to break. No supplies to count. Just this moment. You've been riding for years. Through mountains, deserts, cities that glittered, and cities that screamed. You've seen temples set alight, treaties sealed with blood children hiding behind carts, soldiers cheering on snowy plains. And now, just a campfire. One man hums a low tune, something from the steppes. Another sharpens a knife, though the blade barely needs it. Someone stirs a pot of millet and lamb, fat, the smell so familiar it almost brings tears. And across from you, a younger rider stares into the flames like they're telling stories only he can hear. You're tired, but not just from riding, from remembering. You think of the first time you wore armor that wasn't your own, borrowed from a dead man. It didn't fit right, dug into your ribs. You wore it anyway. You fought anyway, and you lived. You think of the faces you left behind. Your sister who cried the night you rode off. Your mother who handed you a pouch of dried apples with shaking hands. You've long since eaten them, but the pouch still tucked inside your saddlebag. Historians still argue what made the Mongol army so enduring: discipline, mobility, terror. But maybe it's this, the quiet resilience, the ability to keep moving, to ride from blood into bureaucracy, from conquest into caretaking, and never forget who you are beneath it all. A horse nickers nearby. The night is calm, no alarms, no drums, no scouts reporting distant fires, just rest. Here's a quirky truth: Mongols rarely sang about battles. They sang about homes, herds, storms, the sound of hooves in the snow. Victory is exciting, but survival, that's the true epic. The man beside you falls asleep, mouth slightly open. You toss an extra blanket over him. He doesn't stir. You stare at the sky. The stars look the same as they did the first night you rode with this army, cold, distant, silently approving. You whisper a prayer to Tengri, or maybe just to the wind. It doesn't matter. They've both carried you this far. You remember the cities, yes. But more than that, you remember the campfires. A pyramid of skulls fades in memory quicker than a single bowl of warm soup handed to you after a battle. That's the strange part. The brutality never fully hardens you. You've seen a man weep over a bird with a broken wing, then return to sharpening his spear. You've done it yourself. Because in the end, you're not just a soldier, you're a story, a thread woven through an empire stitched from dust, fire, and sweat. Tomorrow you'll ride again, maybe to another campaign, maybe to a garrison, maybe home. But tonight you just sit. You lean back, close your eyes, and listen to the fire whisper. And for the first time in a long time, you breathe. The fire dims and the sounds around you soften. Someone shifts in their blanket, murmuring in their sleep. A horse snorts in the distance. The wind slips through the grass, not howling, but humming. Everything slows now. The hard edges of memory begin to blur. The pounding hooves, the drawn bowstrings, the hiss of arrows cutting the sky. Even the cheers of victory seem like echoes in another room. You are no longer marching, no longer calculating, only resting. The ground is warm beneath you. The stars like flecks of silver in a soft black blanket. You let your fingers trail through the dry grass. You let your shoulders sag. Your breath moves slowly, quietly, like a secret between you and the dark. You've done your part. You've carried the empire on your back, shared your saddle with the storm, and shaped history with calloused hands. Now finally you lay that weight down. The night does not ask questions. It does not remind you of what was or what might come. It simply welcomes you, wraps around you, lets you forget. And in this moment, you are not a warrior. You are just you. Whole, tired, safe. Sleep comes easily now. A soft ripple across the steppe. A long exhale. A dream unfolding behind closed eyes. I'll be here with another story for you tomorrow night.